21 years after Microsoft released Windows 98, which is the first operating system I ever got my hands on, for some reason people are still buying desktop machines. Just like this guy. Who buys this? Now, the issue I have with people buying computers like this one in today's age is that you can build your own for so much cheaper, and that's what we're going to be covering today, is how to build your own computer. Now, the first thing we need to do is get rid of whatever this is, set it down here, and then we will bring over our motherboard. Now, our motherboard is basically what I call the train station of the entire computer. Everything gets plugged into it, and everything is outputted from it. Now, the first thing we're going to be doing is installing our processor. Now, the processor is basically like the heart of the entire computer. It allows our computer to run fast or slow depending upon what kind of processor we put in it. Now, our next step in our tutorial is going to be installing RAM. And no, we are not actually installing an animal into our computer. What RAM allows us to do is run multiple programs at once. With RAM, we can do things like render videos in Premiere Pro or edit photos in Photoshop at relatively decent speed. Now that our RAM is installed, it is time to install our graphics card. Now, our graphics card allows us to run games at a relatively high frames per second, or frames per second being FPS. Games like Apex Legends, Warcraft, or CSGO require a high FPS in order to run smoothly. Now, to install our graphics card, just like the RAM, we're going to be installing it in one of the slots, except it's going to be below our motherboard this time. Now, with our motherboard ready to go, our graphics card installed, our processor in place, and our RAM, well, ready to go as well, it is time to grab our case. Oh gosh. It is a massive case. Alright, so the first thing I need to do is actually get this case open. So we're just going to pop the side panel off. The one with the glass is preferred. Set that over there, and okay, so it looks like we've actually got a lot going on here. Looks like Corsair's actually installed their very own cooler for us already, which is nice. And we've actually got a fan already pre-installed, which most cases actually do come with a fan pre-installed in the front. That way it makes it a little bit easier on us. Now, our next step is going to be installing our motherboard mounts. Now, these mounts are little tiny screws that have the ability to have another screw put into them. So it basically means that we get a little space between our motherboard and the back of our case. This allows for improved ventilation, as well as just makes it so that our case isn't flush against the back of our motherboard. Alright, so now we have our mounts put in place, it is time to put the motherboard into this case. Now, we need to make sure that we line up the holes in the motherboard with our actual mounts, so that way we can secure our motherboard to our case. Okay, so this is what the back of our motherboard and case should look like. We've got a lot of cables here that we're not going to really worry about as of right now, but this is what we're actually going to be focusing on. We have what looks like a couple of holes, and where the processor sits, this is where we need to install a mount. So the next step with our cooler is actually going to be putting in these double-ended screws, which allow our cooler to attach to the mount behind the motherboard. So we actually did luck out in the fact that Corsair already has a cooler pre-installed in this case. All we have to do is install it to our processor. So before we install our cooler to our processor, we actually have to apply some thermal paste, which thermal paste allows there to be a nicer contact between our cooler and our processor. So now we have our thermal paste applied, all we have to do is start to plug in our CPU fan, which is going to go in the port labeled CPU fan on the motherboard. So our next step is actually going to be installing this power supply. What the power supply does is exactly how it sounds. It supplies the computer with power. Okay, so we have the power supply screwed in. All we're going to do now is tilt this up. We're going to take these ridiculously long cables and plug them into the appropriate spots on our motherboard. This cable actually goes right into the side here. Now we do want to be careful not to push down too hard, as this could break our motherboard, but we do want to push down until we hear a click. Our next two cables, one is labeled P3, which actually goes to the top left corner of our motherboard. The other cable is actually for our graphics card. This cable supplies power to the graphics card in order to run. Okay, so now that our power supply is hooked up to the different parts of our motherboard and graphics card, we are actually almost done. The last step to building a computer is, well, the computer needs something to run off of. That's where a hard drive or an SSD can come in handy. An SSD is a solid state drive, which is much faster than the normal hard drives, but you can use either one depending upon your budget to run your computer. So for today's PC, we're actually going to be running it off of a hard drive, and this hard drive already has Windows 10 pre-installed. So what we're going to need to do is get this hard drive put into the hard drive bay of this computer. And there we have it, guys. We have successfully, for the most part, built our very own computer. It's got its characteristics, and it can always be upgraded. We can always add more fans, add in a CD-ROM to the front if we decided to, or do whatever else we wanted to. We can put some LEDs in here. Whatever you want to do with it, you can customize it as much as you like. But anyways, that's going to wrap it up for me, guys. Hope you all enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe if you aren't already, and we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.